the Orphic Mysteries, Ancient Greek Secrets of the Afterlife. Hello and welcome back to Driftwood Histories. Tonight, our journey takes us back to the ancient Greek world, but not to the sunlit temples of the Olympian gods, nor to the public festivals of Athens. We are venturing into a more shadowy, more personal, and far more philosophical stream of ancient spirituality. We are seeking the followers of a god who was also a man, a poet whose music could charm the stones and trees, and who dared to journey into the underworld itself and return. This is the story of the Orphic Mysteries, a secret tradition that offered its followers a radical new understanding of the human soul, the cosmos, and the afterlife. It was a path for those who felt that the official state religions were not enough, for those who sought not just civic piety, but personal salvation. It was a story of a divine spark trapped in a mortal body, and the secret knowledge needed to set it free. So, find your comfortable place. Let the noise of the world fall away. Close your eyes, and allow my voice to be your guide as we explore the myths, the rituals, and the profound philosophy of the followers of Orpheus, and their secret vision of the soul's long journey home. Our story begins, as it must, with the music of a golden lyre, and a love that defied death itself. At the heart of every great mystery school, there lies a foundational myth, a sacred story that is not just a tale, but a key that unlocks the door to its secret teachings. For the ancient Orphics, that key was the tragic and beautiful tale of their founder and patron deity, the man who was also a god, the poet Orpheus. Orpheus was not a typical Olympian god, residing in splendor on a mountain peak. He was a liminal figure, a being who walked between the worlds of gods and mortals, between the living and the dead. He was said to be the son of the Thracian king Aeagrus, and the divine muse Calliope, the muse of epic poetry and eloquence. From his mother, he inherited a gift that was nothing short of divine, a genius for music and song. When Orpheus played his golden lyre, a gift from the god of music and prophecy, Apollo, and when he sang, the very laws of nature seemed to bend to his will. Wild beasts, from the savage lion to the timid deer, would grow calm and lie peacefully at his feet. The trees of the forest would bend their branches to hear him better. The great, unmoving rocks on the mountainside would weep, and the rivers would turn from their courses to follow the sound of his melodies. His music was not just entertainment. It was a cosmic force, a power that could bring harmony to chaos, a divine language that all of creation could understand. The great love of Orpheus's life was a beautiful wood nymph named Eurydice. Their love was profound and all-consuming, but on their wedding day, a shadow fell upon their joy. While walking through a meadow with her companions, Eurydice was pursued by Aristeus, a minor god of beekeeping. Fleeing from his unwanted advances, she did not see where she was stepping. She trod upon a venomous viper, hidden in the long grass. The serpent struck her in the heel, and its poison swiftly stole her life. Orpheus, his heart shattered by a grief that his music could not soothe, did something no mortal had ever dared to do before. Armed only with his lyre and the unbearable weight of his sorrow, he resolved to journey into the underworld itself, to the dark, grim kingdom of Hades, to plead for the return of his beloved. He descended into the earth, his mournful music echoing through the silent, subterranean passages. He charmed his way past Cerberus, the three-headed hound that guards the gates of Hades, lulling the beast to sleep with his song. He played his lyre for the tormented souls of the damned, for Tantalus, who forgot his eternal thirst, for Sisyphus, who rested from his ceaseless labor of pushing a boulder uphill. He brought a moment of beautiful, tragic relief to the joyless shades of the dead. Finally, he stood before the thrones of the rulers of the underworld, the grim, unpitying King Hades, and his solemn queen, Persephone, who herself knew the sorrow of being stolen from the world of light. Orpheus began to sing. He sang of his love for Eurydice, of the brief joy they had shared, and of the profound, endless emptiness of his life without her. He sang a melody so beautiful, so filled with pain and longing, that it moved the unmovable. For the first and only time in all of mythology, the cold, hard hearts of the lords of the dead were touched by pity. The very Erinyes, the Furies, the terrifying goddesses of vengeance, it is said, wept. Hades and Persephone were so moved by his art and his devotion that they agreed to do the impossible. They would release Eurydice's soul from death. But their gift came with one terrible condition. Orpheus was to lead her back up the long, dark path to the world of the living. She would follow behind him as a silent shade. But he must not, under any circumstances, look back at her until they had both fully emerged from the caverns of the underworld and were standing in the sunlight. If he turned his gaze upon her even a moment too soon, she would be lost to him forever. He agreed to the condition. He turned and began the long, treacherous ascent, with the silent, unseen shade of his beloved following behind him. He could hear her faint footsteps on the gravel, but he could not see her. For what seemed like an eternity, he walked on, resisting the overwhelming urge to turn, trusting in the promise of the gods. As he neared the entrance to the upper world, as he could see the first, faint rays of sunlight and feel the fresh air on his skin, a terrible doubt seized his heart. Was she still there? Had the gods tricked him? Was this all a cruel joke? In a final, unbearable moment of human weakness, of love mixed with fear, he turned around. He saw her, for a fleeting, heartbreaking instant, a pale, beautiful shadow, her arms outstretched towards him. But as his gaze fell upon her, the pact was broken. She was pulled back, like smoke, into the darkness forever, with a final, whispered, and inaudible farewell. He had lost her a second time, this time not to fate, but to his own human failing. Devastated and inconsolable, Orpheus returned to the world of the living, a broken man. He forsook the company of all other women and wandered the wilds of his native Thrace, singing only songs of his lost love to the rocks and the trees. His tragic end came at the hands of the Maenads, the frenzied, wine-maddened female followers of the god Dionysus. Enraged by his refusal of their advances, or perhaps by his sorrowful, Apollonian music that stood in stark contrast to their wild, Dionysian ecstasy, they fell upon him in a fury. They tore him limb from limb. His head and his golden lyre were thrown into the river Hebrus, and, according to the legend, they floated, still singing his mournful songs, down to the Aegean Sea and across to the island of Lesbos, which, in his honor, became a great center of poetry and music for all of Greece. This powerful myth is the sacred heart of Orpheism. Orpheus is the archetypal shaman, the culture hero, the man who has journeyed to the land of the dead and returned with secret, divine knowledge. He understands the nature of the soul, the geography of the afterlife, and the mysteries of life and death. But the Orphic tradition has another, even deeper, more complex, and more secret creation myth. A story that explains not just the fate of the soul, but its very origin. This is the myth of Dionysus Zagreus, a story that sets Orpheism apart from all other Greek religions. In the Orphic cosmology, the beginning of all things was not the familiar pantheon of the Olympians. It was a series of primordial, abstract entities. First Chronos, time, and Ananke, necessity, or perhaps Nyx, night. From these primordial forces, a cosmic egg was formed, and from this egg hatched the first, true creator god, Phans, a radiant, winged, androgynous deity of light and creation. Phans, in turn, brought forth the universe. Eventually, after a series of divine successions, the rule of the cosmos passed to Zeus. Zeus, wishing to create an heir who would inherit his universal power, took an unusual consort, his own daughter, Persephone. From this sacred, mystical union, a divine child was born, Dionysus Zagreus. This child was destined to inherit Zeus's throne and to rule the entire cosmos. But the old gods, the Titans, the primal, earthly deities who had been overthrown by Zeus and the Olympians were filled with a terrible jealousy. They saw this new heir as a threat. While the infant Dionysus was playing in his celestial nursery, distracted by a set of toys and, most importantly, a mirror, the Titans seized their opportunity. Their faces painted a stark, deathly white with gypsum to disguise themselves, they crept up on the child. The young god, sensing the danger, tried to escape by transforming himself into a series of different animals: a lion, a horse, a horned serpent, but finally, in the form of a magnificent bull, he was captured. The Titans, in a frenzy of divine violence, tore the bull god apart, limb from limb. They then cooked and, in a horrific act of cosmic cannibalism, they devoured his flesh. But Athena, the goddess of wisdom, managed to save the child's still-beating heart. She brought it to Zeus. Zeus, in his grief and his incandescent rage, unleashed his full power. He destroyed the Titans with his mighty thunderbolts, incinerating them into ash. And from the smoke and soot of these annihilated Titans, a new, tragic race was born, humanity. Zeus then took the still-beating heart of his son, and, according to one version of the myth, he swallowed it. He then mated with the mortal woman Semele, and from this union, Dionysus was born again, a new, reborn god. This strange, violent, and deeply beautiful myth is the absolute key to the entire Orphic philosophy of the human soul. According to the Orphics, humanity has a dual nature, a mixture of the profane and the divine. We are born from the ashes of the Titans, and so our bodies, our material selves, our physical appetites and passions, are titanic, earthly, rebellious, and prone to sin. This is the source of all the evil and suffering in the world. But mixed within those earthly ashes is the divine essence of the god the Titans had consumed. And so, within each and every human being, there is a tiny, trapped, and suffering spark of the divine. A fragment of the soul of the consumed god, Dionysus. The human body, therefore, is a prison. It is a tomb for the divine soul. The famous Orphic maxim was Soma Sema. The body is a tomb. Life on earth is a period of punishment, a cycle of sorrow and suffering. And the entire goal of the Orphic life, the purpose of its secret mysteries, was to purify oneself of this heavy, earthly, titanic nature, in order to liberate the divine, immortal Dionysian spark within. By doing so, one could finally escape the kuklos genesios, the grievous wheel of birth, the endless, sorrowful cycle of reincarnation. This was a radical and revolutionary idea in the Greek world, and it forms the foundation of the entire Orphic path to salvation. The foundational myths of Orpheus and the slain god Dionysus Zagreus were not just stories to be told around a fire. For the followers of the Orphic way, they were a sacred diagnosis of the human condition. They revealed a profound truth, that we are all beings of a dual nature, a divine soul trapped within an earthly, titanic body. With this diagnosis came a prescription, a path to healing, a way of life designed to purify the soul and prepare it for its long and perilous journey after death. The Orphic mysteries, therefore, were not a public festival like the great rites at Eleusis, which were tied to a specific place and time. They were a private, personal, and deeply demanding way of life, a bios or phikos. To be an Orphic was to be an initiate into a secret philosophy, a set of beliefs and practices that governed every aspect of one's existence, from what one ate to how one was buried. This path stood in stark and often deliberate contrast to the civic religion of the Greek city-state. The official Olympian religion, the worship of Zeus, Apollo, Athena, and the others, was largely concerned with the well-being of the community, the polis. It involved public sacrifices, grand festivals, and athletic games, all designed to win the favor of the gods for the city as a whole. It offered little in the way of personal salvation, a detailed moral code for individual conduct, or a hopeful vision of the afterlife. Orpheism, on the other hand, was entirely focused on the individual soul and its ultimate destiny. It was, in many ways, one of the first religions of the book in the Western world. The Orphics had a collection of holy writings, hymns, poems, and complex cosmogonisal of which were attributed to their divine founder, Orpheus himself. These sacred texts, which we now refer to as the Orphic hymns and the Orphic rhapsodies, contained their secret theology. The story of creation from primordial night, the myth of Dionysus Zagreus and the origin of humanity, and the detailed teachings on the nature of the soul. These texts were not publicly available. They were guarded by itinerant priests and mystics, who would travel from town to town, offering initiation into their wisdom. These wandering figures, known as the Orphiodolestai, or Orphic initiators, would perform purification rituals and reveal the secret doctrines to those who were willing to adopt the Orphic way of life. The great philosopher Plato, in his Republic, speaks somewhat dismissively of these figures. He describes them as begging priests and soothsayers who go to the doors of the rich, offering to absolve them of their sins and the sins of their ancestors through secret rites and charms, using a mob of books attributed to Orpheus. While Plato was critical of the commercial aspect, his description confirms the existence of this active, proselytizing movement based on a body of sacred texts. The central practice of the Orphic life was purification or catharsis. Since the body was seen as the tomb of the soul, a physical vessel tainted by its titanic origins, the Orphic initiate had to live a life that consciously and deliberately distanced them from the physical, the passionate, and the corrupt. This led to a strict form of asceticism. The most fundamental and famous rule of the bios or phikos was vegetarianism. To eat meat, particularly the flesh of a sacrificed animal, was, in a profound symbolic sense, to participate in the original sin of the Titans, the violent dismemberment and devouring of the god Dionysus. It was to take on more of the heavy, earthly, titanic nature. By abstaining from all animate food, the Orphics sought to purify the body, to lighten the soul, and to demonstrate their solidarity with the divine, Dionysian spark within. They lived on a simple diet of grains, fruits, and vegetables. They also, according to some sources, practiced celibacy or at least sexual restraint, and they avoided certain other foods and actions that were considered ritually impure. Most famously, they abstained from eating beans. The reason for this prohibition is obscure, but ancient writers offered various explanations. Perhaps because beans caused flatulence, disturbing the spiritual calm, or perhaps because their hollow stems were seen as a connection to the underworld, a ladder for souls. They often wore simple, white linen clothing, a universal symbol of purity and initiation. The Orphics were not a single, centralized church. They were a loose network of small, private brotherhoods and individual seekers. But they shared a common set of revolutionary theological ideas that would profoundly influence the course of Western thought. The first of these was the concept of dualism, the idea of a fundamental and often antagonistic split between a divine, immortal soul and a flawed mortal body. This was a radical departure from the traditional Homeric view, which saw the soul as little more than a faint breath or a witless shadow that animated the body. For the Orphics, the soul was the true self, and the body was its temporary prison. The second was the concept of reincarnation, or, as the Greeks called it, metempsychosis, the transmigration of the soul. The Orphics taught that the soul, because of the original Titanic crime, was trapped in a long, sorrowful, and repetitive cycle of birth, death, and rebirth. It would pass from one body to another human or even animal over many lifetimes, a process that was seen not as an opportunity for growth, but as a form of punishment. They called this the kuklos genesios, the grievous wheel of birth. And the third, and most hopeful, concept was that of salvation. The idea that through a life of purity, asceticism, and most importantly, initiation into the secret knowledge of the Orphic mysteries, the soul could finally purify itself of its titanic nature and escape the grievous wheel forever. So what happened to the soul of an Orphic initiate after death? What was the ultimate promise of their secret rituals? Our most vivid and breathtaking clues come from a series of remarkable archaeological discoveries made over the last century. These are the Orphic gold tablets. These are small, thin leaves of gold, often no bigger than an ivy leaf, that have been found in graves across the Greek world, from Thessaly to Crete to southern Italy, dating from the 4th century BC onwards. They are inscribed with texts that act as a kind of passport, a map, and a set of secret instructions for the soul on its journey through the underworld. They are written in the first person, as a script for the deceased to recite before the judges of the dead. One famous tablet, found in a grave in southern Italy, reads, "You will find on the left of the house of Hades a spring, and by the side thereof standing a white cypress. To this spring approach not near. But you will find another, from the lake of memory, from which cold water flows forth, and there are guardians before it. Say, I am a child of earth and of starry heaven, but my race is of heaven alone. This you know yourselves. And lo, I am parched with thirst and I perish. Give me quickly the cold water flowing forth from the lake of memory. And of themselves they will give you to drink from the holy spring, and thereafter among the other heroes you will have lordship." This text is extraordinary. It provides the soul with the secret knowledge, the gnosis, that it needs to navigate the afterlife. It instructs the soul to avoid the spring of lethe, or forgetfulness, which would wipe its memory clean, causing it to forget its divine origins and be reborn back into the sorrowful cycle of life on earth. Instead, it must seek out the spring of mnemosyne or memory. By drinking from these waters, the soul will remember its true, divine nature. The soul must then confidently declare its identity to the guardians of the underworld. I am a child of earth and of starry heaven, but my race is of heaven alone. This is the secret password. It is a declaration that while the body may be of the earth of the Titans, the soul's true origin is divine, of the stars of Dionysus. By speaking this truth, the soul proves it is an initiate, one who has been purified and has remembered its true self. It is then granted access to a blessed existence, a life of eternal joy among the heroes, finally free from the grievous wheel. Another tablet simply states, I have flown out of the sorrowful, weary wheel. I have passed with swift feet to the diadem desired. I have gone under the bosom of the mistress, the queen of the underworld. And Persephone replies, O blessed and happy one, you shall be a god instead of a mortal. The influence of these powerful Orphic ideas on some of the greatest minds of the ancient world was profound. The philosopher and mathematician Pythagoras, who lived in the 6th century BC, and his secretive brotherhood of followers in Croton, southern Italy, shared many of the same beliefs. The Pythagoreans also lived an ascetic, communal life. They also believed in the transmigration of the soul, and they also practiced vegetarianism. It is often difficult for scholars to tell where Pythagoreanism ends and Orpheism begins. They are two streams flowing from the same mystical source. And, most importantly, the great Athenian philosopher Plato was deeply influenced by this Orphic and Pythagorean tradition. His entire philosophy is saturated with these themes. His famous theory affirms the idea of a perfect, eternal, and divine world of ideas, of which our material world is but a shadowy, imperfect copyist, a philosophical expression of the Orphic dualism between the divine and the earthly. His belief in the immortality of the soul, and his argument that the body is a prison from which the true philosopher seeks to escape through the pursuit of reason and contemplation, is pure Orpheism. Plato's famous myth of air, which concludes his great work, The Republic, is essentially a complex, philosophical retelling of the Orphic doctrine of reincarnation. In it, he describes the soul's journey after death, its judgment, and its choice of a new life before drinking from the waters of forgetfulness and being reborn. Through Plato, these ancient mystical ideas, born from the secret rites of the Orphics, were given a new, powerful, and enduring philosophical framework. They would go on to influence the Neoplatonists of late antiquity, the Gnostics of early Christianity, and the entire hidden stream of Western esoteric thought for the next 2,000 years. Unlike the great public cults of the Olympian gods, which were woven into the very fabric of civic life, Orphism always remained on the periphery. It was a philosophy of the individual, a path for the seeker, not a religion of the state. Its followers were seen by the mainstream of Greek and Roman society as eccentric, as strange outsiders with their stark white robes, their solemn demeanor, and their peculiar refusal to eat meat. The great comedic playwright of Athens, Aristophanes, writing in the 5th century BC, often made fun of them. In his play The Frogs, he satirizes the Orphics, and in The Birds, he includes a parody of an Orphic creation myth. To the pragmatic, worldly citizens of Athens, the Orphics, with their focus on the afterlife and their complex, bookish theology, were easy targets for parody. And unlike the Eleusinian Mysteries, which were a single, centralized, and state-protected festival held at a specific, sacred site, the Orphic movement was decentralized and diffuse. It was a loose network of small, private brotherhoods and wandering, charismatic priests, the Orphiotelestai. This lack of a central authority or a physical temple complex made it both resilient in its ability to spread and vulnerable to persecution and eventual decline. As Christianity rose to become the dominant religion of the late Roman Empire, the Orphic traditions, like all other pagan practices, came under increasing and eventually violent attack. The early Christian church fathers, figures like Clement of Alexandria and Augustine, were well aware of Orphism, and they saw it as a dangerous rival. They recognized the power of its core ideas, the concept of a suffering and resurrected Savior God in Dionysus, the promise of personal salvation, the belief in an immortal soul, and the idea of a final judgment. But they condemned these ideas as a pagan distortion, a demonic imitation of the one true faith. The similarities were too close, too unsettling. The church sought to eliminate, not to absorb, this rival path to salvation. By the end of the 4th century AD, with the final triumph of Christianity under emperors like Theodosius I, the old pagan world was systematically dismantled. The ancient temples were closed, their rituals were forbidden, and their sacred texts were destroyed. The living, breathing tradition of the Orphic mysteries faded into silence. The golden lyre, it seemed, had finally stopped singing. But did it ever truly disappear? Or did it, like the soul in its own doctrines, simply transmigrate, its powerful ideas being reborn in new forms, in new philosophies, and in new eras? The legacy of Orphism is a profound, and often hidden, one. It is the legacy of a revolutionary set of ideas that fundamentally altered the spiritual landscape of the West. The Orphics were among the first in the European world to propose a coherent vision of the human being as a divine soul trapped in a mortal body, and to offer a systematic, ethical, and ritual path for its liberation. This fundamental concept of a profound dualism between spirit and matter, of reincarnation as a cycle of purification, and of salvation through asceticism and secret knowledge, gnosis, would become a cornerstone of much of Western mysticism for the next 2,000 years. It flowed directly into the sophisticated philosophy of Plato. Through Plato, the Orphic vision was given a new, powerful, and enduring philosophical framework. His dialogues ensured that these mystical ideas would be studied, debated, and preserved in the great academies of the ancient world. Plato's student Aristotle, though he rejected many of his master's mystical leanings, still engaged with these ideas, ensuring their place at the very center of philosophical discourse. And in the intellectual melting pot of late antiquity, particularly in Alexandria, Plato's philosophy, saturated as it was with Orphic themes, gave rise to the great school of Neoplatonism. The Neoplatonists, like the 3rd century philosopher Plotinus, took the Orphic Platonic vision and developed it into a complex and beautiful metaphysical system. They described the universe as a series of emanations from a single, ineffable divine source, the One, and they taught that the goal of the philosophical life was to return the soul, through contemplation and virtue, to that divine source. The Orphic current also deeply influenced the various Gnostic movements of early Christianity. The Gnostics, with their belief in a secret gnosis needed to awaken the divine spark of light within and escape the corrupt material world, which they believed was created by a lesser, ignorant god, the Demiurge, were, in many ways, the direct Christian inheritors of the Orphic worldview. The body was a prison, the world was a tomb, and salvation was a matter of remembering one's true, celestial home. Through these powerful channels, Platonism, Neoplatonism, and Gnosticism, the ideas of the Orphics continued to flow like an underground river through the Middle Ages. They resurfaced in the works of medieval Christian mystics, in the complex symbolism of the alchemists, who sought to purify matter just as the Orphics sought to purify the soul, and in the secret teachings of heretical groups like the Cathars in southern France. And with the rediscovery of classical texts during the Renaissance, the Orphic and Hermetic traditions experienced a major revival. Renaissance thinkers and artists were captivated by this ancient wisdom, this prisca theologia or ancient theology, which they believed was a single, universal truth that had been revealed to figures like Orpheus, Hermes Trismegistus, and Zoroaster. This Renaissance revival, in turn, laid the groundwork for the esoteric societies of the modern era. The Rosicrucians of the 17th century, with their myth of a founder who had traveled to the East and their goal of a universal reformation, were echoing the story of Orpheus. And the Freemasons, with their allegory of the soul's journey through degrees of initiation from darkness to light, were practicing a form of the same ancient path. Today, the Orphic gold tablets sit silently behind glass in museums around the world. They are archaeological artifacts, labeled and catalogued. But they are also something more. They are intimate, personal, and deeply moving messages from a world that is long gone. They are the last, faint whispers of a secret faith that offered its followers a map for the soul's greatest and most mysterious journey. The Orphic mysteries remind us that the human quest for meaning, for an answer to the great questions of life and death, is as ancient as consciousness itself. They show us that long before the rise of our modern religions, long before the certainties of modern science, our distant ancestors were already grappling with the profound and beautiful paradox of being human off being a finite mortal body that contains an infinite and perhaps divine spirit. They believed that life was a pilgrimage, a temporary exile, and that death was not an end, but a homecoming. And so our journey into the world of the Orphic mysteries comes to its conclusion. We have followed the myth of the great poet Orpheus on his tragic, love-fueled descent into the dark kingdom of Hades, a journey that no mortal had ever before attempted. We have listened to the strange and beautiful Orphic story of our own divine origins, the myth of the child god Dionysus Zagreus, who was torn apart by the jealous Titans, and from whose ashes humanity was born a race with a dual nature, part earthly and rebellious, part divine and suffering. We then walked the path of purification, the bios or phikos. We saw how the followers of this secret philosophy adopted a life of strict asceticism, wearing white linen, practicing vegetarianism, and abstaining from meat to avoid partaking in the original Titanic sin. We learned of their sacred texts, the Orphic hymns and rhapsodies, and the wandering priests, the Orphiodolestai, who carried this secret knowledge from city to city. We saw how their core beliefs in a dualistic universe, in the immortality of the soul, and in the grievous wheel of reincarnation, or metempsychosis offered a radical alternative to the public civic religions of ancient Greece. And, most vividly, we held in our mind's eye the small, precious Orphic gold tablets, the secret passports for the dead. We deciphered their instructions, to avoid the waters of forgetfulness and to drink instead from the lake of memory, so the soul could remember its celestial origins and declare before the guardians of the underworld, I am a child of earth and of starry heaven, but my race is of heaven alone. This was the key to their salvation, the promise of escaping the endless cycle of rebirth and finding a final, blessed resting place among the heroes. Finally, we traced the fading lyre, the legacy of this secret philosophy. We saw how its powerful ideas were absorbed and transformed by some of the greatest minds of the ancient world, from Pythagoras to, most importantly, Plato. Through Plato's dialogues, the Orphic vision of an immortal soul trapped in a mortal body was given a new, enduring philosophical framework. We followed this underground river of thought as it flowed through the Neoplatonists of Alexandria, influenced the early Christian Gnostics, was preserved by Islamic scholars, and re-emerged in the esoteric traditions of the Renaissance, from alchemy to Rosicrucianism. The Orphics were a quiet countercurrent to the mainstream of the ancient world. They offered not a religion of public spectacle, but of private contemplation. Not a path of civic duty, but of personal salvation. Their ideas were radical. Their practices were seen as strange, but their influence has echoed through the centuries, a quiet, persistent, and beautiful melody playing beneath the louder noise of official history. They remind us that sometimes, the most powerful and enduring truths are not the ones shouted from the great temples or enforced by the state, but are the ones whispered in secret, from one seeker to another, across the long and silent corridors of time. The echo of Orpheus's lyre never truly fell silent. It simply changed its tune, and it can still be heard by those who know how to listen. Thank you for joining me on this voyage with Driftwood Histories. If these stories have stirred your curiosity and soothed your mind, I invite you to subscribe and join our community of fellow travelers. There are many more hidden currents of time, many more secret philosophies, for us to explore together. Until then, sleep well. May you remember your own divine origins. May you find your own path of purification. And may your dreams be filled with a beautiful and gentle music. Good night.